Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Web of Wyrd. After our new reboot a couple of weeks ago, I want to thank all of the listeners out there for your amazing feedback, the messages, the emails, and everything else. Thank you for supporting us with this new reboot of the show. And today we're going to be tackling a few of the topical issues that are on the, let's call it the news or the broadcasting services that are out there. And we're going to be looking at why they feel relevant to many things going on for us at this moment. So without further ado, I want to introduce again my wonderful co-host, Pete Jackson Main. Hello, brother. How are you?
Hello, Davyd. I'm good, actually. Got through the solar massive ejection episode of the last few days. A bit hairy, but I'm here and bouncing and ready to go. It's good to be here again.
Cool, nice. Yeah, so maybe we can actually start with the new moon on Friday, because I mean, I can't speak for everyone out there, but boy, I absolutely got slammed by that. We had, first of all, we had the new moon itself, which was strong, but then we also had, as you just said, a couple of coronal mass ejections. They hit here in Mexico at midnight and 6 a.m. And I was actually still up at midnight, and I suddenly felt the energy shift. And I was kind of feeling somewhat sort of sleepy and ready for bed, and suddenly felt completely wired to the point just like, oh my God, like what's going on here? And then really wasn't able to sleep for another 2 or 3 hours after that, finally passed out. And then again, woke up bolt upright somewhere around 6, probably with the second slam dunk, and had a very, very sort of weird day as a consequence that felt a bit sort of, a bit watery and wobbly. But what about you? How was it for you?
Well, I just sort of fell into a whole load of really, really kind of emotional bits and pieces, stuff that I haven't really experienced in my field for a long time. And I know that I have a personal narrative that connects with that, and it goes a long, long, long way back. Series of dreams also connecting me up with it as well recently, especially last night, actually. It's not over yet. And I just got faced everywhere I went. I got faced with the distortions that were occurring, and I have to own up to them, and I have to I have to confess, if you like, that I wasn't seeing things or speaking truthfully. I wasn't seeing things straight, and it caused a lot of disruptions in my immediate circle, and that was really and there's a lot of other things hitting alongside that. Particularly, I think there's a story we're going to hook into today, the ridiculous business about Will Smith slapping Chris Rock. And I don't know why that was so sort of grabbed my attention so much, because it did sort of become a global event, which was ludicrous given what it was. But then I started to look into it and started to think, well, actually, this is kind of similar to the kind of thing that I've been experiencing. It's when you kind of go along for a ride with a narrative or with an idea or with a story, and then it lands you up looking like a complete idiot. Do you know what I mean?
Unfortunately, I do. Yeah. This is what happens when you tend to be a little bit outspoken and voice your how to say, your more inquiring thoughts into the public space. And we are going to have a look at some of the topical themes of this last week, and that's definitely one of them. But I also want to begin really to get into something which nearly kind of caught us out today. And you were sharing a funny story with me before we jumped on the recording session here, which is about how the clocks have changed this week. And so it's kind of super confusing, really, because they change it, that it's not a uniform thing. So we've only just had our clock changes here today, and I think you guys had it last week or 2 weeks ago. Is that right?
Yeah, it was it was a week ago. That's right. And we had trouble setting up this meeting because neither of us could work out what time it would be when we wanted to do our recording. But yeah, ours went back last Sunday, and the funny story was that my partner Angie, who was talking to somebody, and somebody said to her, "Oh, the clocks go forward this morning." And Angie said, "Well, no, they don't. They went forward 2 weeks ago." And the person looked at her as though she were completely crazy. And then I just happened to rock up, and Angie looked at me and said, "The clocks go forward this morning." And I suddenly said, yes. I clocked that too. And in the meantime, what had happened was 2 weeks ago, we had basically looked at each other. Oh, clocks go forward this morning. Neither of us questioned it. And we woke up the next morning absolutely convinced that we lost an hour of sleep. We did check with each other beforehand that, you know, the mobile phone clocks, we don't have any clocks in our house. The only thing we've got are these phones and computers. And they reset themselves. So we would not have been the wiser had they gone forward or not. And that's the whole point. And we both went through the entire week convinced. And we even said things like, we better go to sleep early tonight because we missed an hour earlier on, you know, and it wasn't near us. That went on until about Tuesday or Wednesday, still sort of convincing ourselves that we felt super tired because we lost an hour of sleep, which was obviously a complete fiction. And meanwhile, alongside that, there was another part of myself that was looking around at the natural world and thinking, nothing's changed. And I couldn't work out, should it be darker in the morning? Should it be lighter in the morning? And every time I tried to think about it, I was just, my brain just wouldn't cope with it. I'm very busy anyway. So, you know, for me, it's get up, get ready, go to work, which usually means driving into London and then coming back and getting back late. So it's been a hell of a couple of weeks from that point of view. But all this time I was sort of thinking, clocks go, that doesn't quite work. You know, and if I think that what it eventually came through to me about it was that the whole thing about time is that it just is an imposition. It's a structure that's imposed by civilization, for want of a better word, you know, by the human matrix. And it has nothing to do with what's going on out there at all. You know, if you were waking up with the rhythms that are natural, I mean, I tend to wake up with the light these days, and I quite like that, even though I don't get up altogether, but I tend to wake up when it goes light, and when the dark comes along, I sort of feel quite naturally it's time to sort of start preparing for the night. And I like the shorter nights because I like light, and I'm a summer baby and all of that. But what got through to me was how ridiculous it is really to be in the situation that we were in, not actually to know what time it was in any kind of meaningful sense. So there you go.
Well, yeah, you know, and I think, you know, from the point of view of this morning is that, you know, even before we started recording, we weren't sure like what the time was. And like you said, you know, if you remove the tech products from your living space and you don't have clocks, you wouldn't know the difference, because the clocks, like you say, they do reset themselves. And so it's a much more, we could say on one level, a much more seamless experience than perhaps it was, you know, 20 years ago when the clocks went forwards or back, because that would often be quite a disorientating day, actually. You know, I remember sort of in my teenage and 20 year, you know, in my 20s. And I guess the reason we're introducing this and is really down to, you know, what's real. Again, you know, this is a theme I think we're going to often come up with in Web of Weird. It's like, what is reality, and how much are we receiving, even in this case, you know, the structure of time, and how relevant is it to us if we're actually in tune with the natural cycle. And in preparation for this particular piece on Web of Weird, I decided to do a little bit of research into daylight saving and where it originated from. And so apparently the first countries to use daylight saving time back in 1916 were Germany and Austria. But apparently a little known fact is that a few hundred Canadians beat the German Empire by 8 years. And so on July the 1st, 1908, the residents of Port Arthur in Ontario, today known as Thunder Bay, turned their clocks forward by 1 hour to start the world's first daylight saving period. So there you go, everybody. That's the origins of daylight saving. But I mean, on one level, I guess from the view of a capitalist world where we're being encouraged to maximize the amount of time that we can work, it kind of makes sense. But from the point of view of living in harmony with nature, it's an aberration, right? It's an imposition.
Absolutely. And that's what really came through to me very strongly, because the idea of daylight saving is a nonsense. How do you save daylight? It's there for a certain length of time and then it goes away and then it comes back again. So it struck me, you know, I mean, I'm in a strange position here because I talked about driving around to London. I drive around to London because the college that I teach at is there. And I'm kind of passionate about my work there. I have lots of fantastic students there and I love what I do. But actually, it's a million miles away from the job of being a herbalist. And this is quite an interesting one because I remember a friend of ours once lecturing to our association, and he said, the great thing about being a herbalist is I don't really have a job. It's not a job. Nobody recognizes it. You get those online forms where you fill in what's your profession. There's no choice for herbalists at all. And he said the great thing about that is nobody can sack me because I haven't got a job. But what came through to me was that, if I was a herbalist, like in the old days, or the way we imagine they might have been, and perhaps where we imagine they might be, perhaps somewhere similar, Davyd, to where you are now, i.e. you get up when it's light, you do what you do, you talk to the plants, you grow the plants, you minister the plants, you might minister to a few humans as well. And then at the end of the day, you just kind of settle down and go to sleep and get up and do it again the next day. Right. Because of this sort of thing, everybody's supposed to, I've always resisted this, by the way. I've always resisted having jobs that force me to be up at a certain time and at a certain destination, but I seem to have got into it. And the weird thing is I've got into it through doing what I want to do. Well, I'm aware that, maybe I don't want to carry on doing that for too much longer. But it is the grid becomes necessary when we all have to sync in with one another. I mean, if we didn't have it, then my students wouldn't be able to get to the college on time, and we'd all be at 6s and 7s and all the rest of it. It's quite interesting actually looking at herbal students, how in stark contrast to some of the other things that we teach there. We teach biomedicine, we teach nutrition, etc., etc. But I always notice the herbal students are the least punctual, which I think means something.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of just listening to you talk there and just feeling the difference between the sort of the North European way of productivity and Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 and work, and then sort of Mexico time frame, which is very much based on mañana, and it's kind of adjusting from one way of living in Britain to something living in a different way in Mexico has been a jolt. If I'm honest, it's definitely been a jolt, and letting go of all of the side effects of that kind of time pressure that we feel quite strongly, I guess, certainly in Britain and probably most of Northern Europe, it's kind of been removed, and with it a lot of stress has been removed, actually, if I'm honest, and with that also the opening of a space like you just alluded to, which is much more sort of nature focused. I can get up when when the sun comes up, I get out, I need to water the plants, all of my beautiful baby wormwood plants I put in this week, they all need watering first thing in the morning because it's hot, and they need to have a drink. And so my daily routine is now much more dictated by what I need to do with my plants, which of course is dictated by things like, daylight and the weather. And so, even organizing this morning, having to try and put my headspace into daylight saving and which time zone is Pete in and which time zone am I in. And it's like, yeah, it's a little bit stressful when you haven't had to think about this. And, we're living at a time when many of us have observed that the time itself seems to have speeded up. Now, is that an actual thing? Is it a perception? Because a second is still a second, a minute is still a minute, an hour is still an hour, etc. But it's almost as if I feel that the nature of manifestation and things happening in the world is happening so quickly, it gives the perhaps illusion that time is sped up. But if we're just living by sunrise and sunset, then probably there's no difference at all, right?
Yeah, but time is a funny thing, isn't it? Because there's a perspective from which you could say it doesn't really exist.
Right.
Or rather it does, to the extent that we create it for whatever purpose. And there's that other saying, which I really like, somebody very famous said, and I can't remember who, that time expands to accommodate the things you have to do. And that's definitely something that I experience in my life. I mean, colossally busy person, and somehow I managed to get it all done. People look at me and say, how do you manage to do all that? I say, well, I just kind of think, well, it's fine, it's going to be done, just like I see it as being done, and I do it, and that's that. It doesn't sometimes fulfill me as much as I'd like, because it does mean that every second of the day is crammed with something, and I'm conscious that other things may be falling out of the loop. For example, spending time out in nature, trying to figure out what's going on there as well. And I think that, it's also part of what structures in life, and maybe this will take us somewhere else as well. What structures in life are we willing to take on that serve us, and up to what point do they continue to serve us? I think with structure is concerned, structure and the matrix or whatever, is we've created it to be useful more than anything. We created it because it enables us to cooperate on projects and so forth. But at a certain point, it also becomes a prison. It becomes galling. It becomes something that we perhaps feel, this is why the whole capitalist system, or the way we have structured it, is we slave away for 50 years to, pay the mortgage and contribute to the economy. And then we retire. There's another concept that I have no time for whatsoever. I can't see myself retiring at all. I mean, retirement to me would be like death, it'd be like retire from reality altogether, but up till that time, I want to be completely productive. And it's just a question of where you focus next. You asked what's real, and I think the answer to that for me is what's real is what you focus on, but be careful what you focus on and make sure. I think there's something else that you said in a recent interview that you did with Naranjan Nota, and she said, what can people do? And I think I've quoted you, actually, I've written it down, so I'm going to say it. It says, life can be simple. And it occurred to me when I was thinking about that, it can be simple even if you're doing complicated things, because it's still like, this is what I've got to do, and I believe in doing it. I'm passionate about doing it. I know it's important, so I'm going to do it. That's simplicity as well. And then the next thing you said was, when you face with the choice, can I do this? Can I do that? The answer as to which one you should do is what makes your heart sing. That's the question I've been asking myself for a lot of decades now, and it's the reason why I am where I am. And I think maybe to the extent that we're all questing, I'm actually pretty pleased with where I've got to in my life. And I think that the reason for that is because I've asked that question. I started asking it a long time ago, and I tended to follow that as my rule for, for example, one of my teachers said to me, if you get up in the morning and you don't like what you're doing, it's not fun anymore, then stop doing it. And I've done that a couple of times. I've said, like you did with your previous profession, you get up, okay, that doesn't fit me anymore. I don't want to do that. But actually, if you do follow your heart, then you generally end up in the right place, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I mean, you've just said a bunch of things there that I'm just going to kind of bring back in, because I think they're super interesting. This idea of the present moment expanding. I mean, this is a dandelion teaching. Our good old friend El Dandolero, I mean, this is definitely his kind of time space, showing that the more present we are, the more the present moment expands, because there is only the present moment. And it's really about how conscious we are and aware we are in that present moment. And I think this is one of the beautiful things that I've learned from plants, particularly when I'm with plants in the garden or I'm making medicines, is that once you're in that kind of space with the plant, nothing else matters. So there is no time. You're outside of time and space. And, working with plant spirits at the quantum level is outside of time and space. So I think that's kind of interesting. But also, one of the major qualities of dandelion in this regard is time management, or the management of energies. And like you just alluded to with your sort of busy life, it's like how do we become more present in each and every moment, so that we are managing the energies rather than them sort of perhaps managing us. And that then links to what you said about structures. Which structures do we adopt, and which ones are beneficial for us? Do we adopt some for a limited period whilst they suit us and then drop them and shift up? And are we at a time when we're letting go of all of the structures? And for the astrologers out there, I know that there are some pretty strong conjunctions and transits with Saturn going on at the moment, who would, of course, represent structure. So it seems to me that, a lot of what we're talking about at the moment in regards to time is, how do we become more present? How do we then, from that place of, sort of being much more still and present, how do we then conduct ourselves and manage the energy flow, through us in our lives? And then, where does that take us? And I think that this is a very interesting point that we're all at. And perhaps, just looking at this nature of time is a way of breaking it down and showing that it is another construct. And yes, it's useful. It does have its uses. But again, like many things, it's not the be all and the end all. And linear time is a construct, right?
Yes, exactly. And that idea that time, it's not, I said it once, I think, on a Facebook post, and I was attacked from all sides. How dare you say time doesn't exist? Well, of course it exists in a certain, but, like everything else exists as a construct. And at any time you can let go, and it's built into the language. At any time you could let go of time. There are sort of three mantras that I actually got from somewhere else. I got from some books that I was very, very keen on reading back in the 70s. I don't know whether you've come across them. They're channeled information from a lady called Jane Roberts. I don't know whether you heard of her at all. And the entity coming through says three things very powerfully that come, come over and over again. He basically repeats over and over again. I think they work really well in the context of this narrative that we're spinning here, to sort of, kind of somehow encapsulate what we're trying to say. One is you create your own reality, which is something that we've been talking about quite a lot, you and I. The second is the present is your point of power. That really relates to what you were saying about El Dandolero and, how the present can expand, according to what you've got to fill it with. And then the third one, which I think is also kind of intriguing, especially when we're talking about choices, is free will. Free will always applies. And I had to struggle with that one for a moment, because I think it's very, for a while, because I think it's often the case that we feel quite, cynical about the concept of free will. We've been taught that we're a bunch of, neurological events that are sort of conditioned by the past and firing unconsciously into the future. And we forget that we are actually directed from a soul force, if you like, who has actually put us here in this situation for a particular purpose. And that is where the choice exists. So the choice, if you like, exists at a higher level, a level where actually time is a lot more fluid. We make the choices at a level where, at a level of time, if I can call it that, which is not the one that we normally experience. I don't know whether that goes too far off piste, bro, but that's kind of where it got me.
I don't think there is a web of weird off piste. I think that we're permanently off piste, bro. So it's all good.
Oh, well, that's fine then.
So I think the entity you're talking about is Seth. Seth speaks.
That's right. Yeah.
Those are three really, really important points, and that, for those listeners out there, I would really sort of take some time and sit and meditate with all of those. And I was having an interesting conversation yesterday with a friend about this, actually, about the nature of free will. And it's something that in one of my sessions Zach brought up, actually, the Ascended Master that Janet Trelawa channels, and we were talking about the nature of the mess that we're in. And he said, really and truly, he said, everything that is going on in the world right now is because of Lucifer's rebellion to give humans the option of free will, which I think is interesting. And we can see within the game, the labyrinth, the illusion that is duality, that there are many people exercising absolute free will right now. And that's within the game and duality, that's their right to do that. However, it then gets a bit more complicated when they start exercising their free will in ways over other people that maybe they haven't got consent for. And I think that that's where things can get a bit jumbled up. But within the context of this kind of discussion, I think it's interesting that when we're really in the flow with our higher self and in the flow of our intuition, it is actually to some extent pretty sort of preordained. It's our destiny. So really and truly what I've come to understand is that free will gives us the option to move away from our destiny and experience something that isn't preordained. However, when we do that, we start to accrue karma because of cause and effect. So we have this choice that supposedly, Lucifer has given us the option of free will that we can exercise. But when we do, there is the knock-on effect of cause and effect, and every action has a reaction. So there's a karmic imprint there. But when we're in our flow with our higher self, we're being guided to the things that are beneficial to us. So it's a somewhat kind of paradoxical idea that the use of free will actually, in many ways, probably takes us away from our sort of preordained soul destiny. So that's just something to sit and ponder for a while too. But this idea of the present moment, just to give an example, there must be listeners out there who've done this too. But running late for an aeroplane to the airport and sitting on the underground, I've done this a number of times, praying hard. Please make sure I get to the airport on time. Please make sure I get to the airport on time. And the amount of times that I've been running late and shouldn't have made particular flights and somehow got through customs in record time, got my bag checked in record time, and got to the gate just as it's shutting. I don't know how many times that's happened. And sometimes from situations that I had no right to make that plane. But by just being in that sort of present moment space and expanding it with intention, somehow I made all of those flights. And I've shared this with a number of people who've had similar experiences. So it's made me wonder, how much we can, with really clear, strong intention, even bend time in the present moment to our own needs.
I absolutely believe we can. And yes, of course, I've had experiences like that myself. And I think, I sort of ponder on this a lot actually, because time for me is a big number, you know, is of the essence, you know, that expression, time is of the essence,
Mm.
which is an interesting expression actually. Time is of the essence, and the essence is a good thing, surely. So if time is of the essence, then presumably it is something we can use as we want, and because we're constructing it, we can also make it obey our rules. That's what I think about time anyway.
Mm.
So
No.
the dandelion thing, of course, is wonderful too, from that point of view. And it reminds me actually that when people are healing, like, you know, because I my work basically is about getting people better from mainly physical illnesses, but you can't separate physical illness from other things as well.
Mhm.
And I've always struggled to understand this, but it seems to me that what is the moment when healing takes place? What at what time, if you like, does the healing take place? Because we always say, oh, well, it'll take time, you know, it'll take time for you to heal. Don't expect to be healed all at once. Whilst maybe you believe in a way that you could, but it's unlikely that you will, because there's a lot of shifting and adjustment that needs to be done. But one of the things that I have consistently failed to identify or pin down, and I think I'm glad that I haven't pinned it down, because I think it's truly magical. It's at the moment when something actually resolves, whether it's a serious health problem or any other problem that you can have, is almost as though you have in fact done that thing of flipping timelines. It's a bit like warts that suddenly disappear. As long as you focus on them, they're always there. And then someday after a while, you get fed up with focusing on them. So you forget about them. You just live your life. And then the next time you look at your hands, the warts have gone. And it's a bit like that with healing as well. And I think that has something to do with time. It has something to do with our expectations of time. And how does one moment transmute into the next? This is the other thing. If you think of a movement, if you like, within time, you know, what happens is we tend to think of it as a sort of some sort of gliding movement. That's what we see when our neurology is fired up to observe sequential time. But is it really like that? You know, presumably there could be a situation where you could be, and this is what the quantum physicists say, and I'm sure that this is part of, you know, quantum healing is probably what I'm describing here, is that you could be in two times or places at the same time. In one place you could be sick, and in another place you could be well. And one of the ideas I think that comes into healing is that if you focus on being sick, you do not get well. To
Hmm.
get well, you have to focus on being well. You have to put yourself on that timeline where you actually suddenly, without knowing it, you you throw the switch, and the disease, in inverted commas, is no longer there.
I mean, totally. I mean, I'm just going to loop back to what you said. Don't expect you will heal at once. I mean, this is, I've had similar experiences inside our very esteemed National Healthcare Service, that basically, and then this happened before I had an operation on my left knee, was that I was effectively attempted to be spelled before I went into my operation, you know, and my surgeon said, well, of course, Mr. Farrell, you're not 25 anymore and your knee's never going to be the same as it was. And that was literally the last thing he said to me before I was about to go in for the anesthetic. I'm just thought, you know what, man, I'm not going to accept that. And I kind of had already prepared energetically. I did a lot of stuff in preparation for this operation. But I thought, you know, that's, you know, creating a dynamic where I'm being told that don't expect to get better. I'm like, why can't I expect to get better? Is it because you don't have any confidence in your surgery abilities, or are you covering your backside because you think there's a possibility that I might come back to you afterwards and say you've not done a good job, and therefore some kind of litigation might take place or something? Or is it just ingrained into that particular part of the healthcare system that you really dumb down people's expectations and keep them in a place of sickness? You know, which, like you said, you know, within a national healthcare system, we have to question why we're being told that we should expect not to get better. You know, I don't think that that's a good, you know, trajectory for health. And I like what you also said about two possible timelines of one being ill and one not being ill. And I could perhaps see that in terms of the work I do, the quantum healing work, and that sometimes when I do healing work in the 5D or particularly the 4D space, the astral body, the emotional body, is that I see that the healing's taking place and the person is well again. However, in the 3D, there is a process that then has to be observed, which is the release. And so they are actually still sick in the physical space, because there is a lag that I've talked about before from the higher sort of 4D and particularly 5D dimensions down into 3D that has to be observed. And I feel that as a motif for what we're seeing in the world right now. We are observing the three-dimensional manifestation process of stuff that has already been concluded quite some time ago. It's one of the reasons that I'm very confident about the trajectory of certain aspects of humankind right now, is because I've seen it. I've seen that stuff has already unfolded. I've seen the collapse. I've seen the new earth come in, but it hasn't manifested yet down into 3D because of this kind of lag period, but also because of belief systems. You know, we have to believe that we're going to get better. Otherwise, if we're in a belief system that I'm not going to get better, you're not going to get better. You know, so belief systems really come into this too. And I think that another thing you said that just caught my attention was this idea of, when does one present moment finish and the next one start?
Yeah.
Which of course is an absurd idea, really, if you think about it, because it's all the same moment, really evolving. So from that perspective, you know, we can only break down one present moment to another by the use of the construct of linear time. From 1 second to the next, we can say, well, that second was different from this one, and that minute was different from this one somehow, because we can make that separation. But if we remove that, then all we have is one just continuously evolving, unfolding experience. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfolding from within. There's a lot in late 20th century philosophy that comments on this, actually. I don't know, it's probably a little bit too erudite, perhaps, but I don't know if anybody out there has heard of a guy called Gilles Deleuze. Have you heard of Deleuze?
I haven't, but I'm all ears, mate.
He talks about the concept of immanence, which is reality unfolding from within in every moment, sort of thing, and it never stops. I have this huge vision. It looks a bit like the sort of thing you see in Tibetan tankas, actually, and other sort of sacred art like mandalas and things, and it's certainly very, very trippy from the sense of it's also the kind of thing that you see when you take certain master plants, and you get this vision of the entire universe, which is colossal, creating itself in this way. And anything you can think in it, any thought that crosses your path or your mind or whatever that you generate, creates another universe, because immediately there's another track happening, and it's just stupendous. But getting back a little bit down to earth again with it, when you talked about that experience you had with your knee, I had lots and lots of similar experiences like that, and I meet it in people all the time. They have been told by their physicians, who are, to their shame, that they will not get better, that this is incurable, that they will need these drugs for the rest of their lives. And I specialize personally as a teacher and a healer in getting people to drop those beliefs. And like you said, it's absolutely about belief. I'm told that my hip will never regenerate its cartilage, and therefore I need a hip replacement. That's what I was told. That was like 5 years ago or so. I went to an osteopath and paid him 300 quid to tell me that. I was actually there for him to help me. I've now found an osteopath who believes that it can heal, which is much, much better. And she does some manipulations, and I walk after that. And over the 4 or 5 years since I've been expecting not to get better, I can actually walk much better now than I could 5 years ago. And I know that I'm going to solve this problem, because that's what I'm focused on. I'm not focused on the idea that it's, that the cartilage will not regenerate. It's like a mantra that you can tell yourself, the cartilage will not regenerate. And so, of course, you won't get better. But if you say, actually, I can heal anything, I created this body, and I can continue to create it in health according to its original template. And yeah, there's a lag. You're right. There's a lag. And I think that's the sort of condition. This is one of the things that makes healing difficult, because people get very discouraged. They put the intention out there and they have all the right thoughts and the right visualizations. It doesn't come back at them immediately. So there's a sort of, working with expectations for people, is just saying, look, have faith, if you like, just sit on that, and it'll calm. And there are ways of sort of accelerating it actually as well. But I really like, I think it was Avicenna, the very, very famous 9th or 10th century herbalist, actually, or healer, physician in Salerno, which was an Italian city where the Arabs established a bridgehead of culture. You can read about it actually in Barbara Grigg's book that we were talking about last time. And he had a saying, which was, there is no such thing as an incurable disease. There is only the want of knowledge, which I thought is spectacular for our times, because you know, the medical profession, like every other science, goes around telling us that um, that they have the knowledge, you know. I mean, I've even read books from our perspective, the herbalist perspective, written around the turn of the 19th, 20th century, that say things like, we now know how to cure all disease. And of course they don't. And it's no different with modern medicine these days either. They don't know how to cure half the stuff that comes in front of them. All they can do is to manage it with drugs and procedures, etc., etc. But they'd be the first to admit they don't cure anything. And yet partly this depends upon the idea that they ram down our throats. I'm not being horrible to medics and doctors here. You know, I'm just saying that we all do it ourselves. Basically, we take on these ideas that we can't get better. And when it comes to things that will actually, you know, kill you in the long term or in the short term, then it's really, really serious, you know, because we're literally killing ourselves with the thoughts that we're having about what's about our condition.
Right. I mean, brilliant. You know, it's kind of something I've talked about in recent interviews and calls with people is this idea of like, why are we allowing ourselves to be sick? Because ultimately, if we look back to this idea of free will and our higher self and destiny, then it's all part of the story. So have we used our free will and become sick because of that? And if so, then can we perhaps go, okay, let me just tune back more into myself and realize that for some reason that when I went away from my soul's natural trajectory, that it made me sick. Okay, so I've allowed that to happen to myself. Why? You know, and I think the more that we can really enter into this belief system of like, I am well and healthy and everything else is not true for me, then it's not a case of, as one of my teachers would say, a wishy hopey thinky thing. It's actually something that comes through with trust, because you start to see that when you are in the present moment and you're trusting that everything is fine, then there isn't any reason to get sick. And you do then start to ask yourself the question, well, like, well, what is my belief system that's making me sick? And that's also part of the journey that I think we're on right now, is each and every one of us taking much more individual responsibility for our own personal well-being, and understanding, as I've said before, the
Yeah.
person who understands that best can only really be you. You know, how can somebody else tell you about your health better than you are if you're in tune with yourself? It's preposterous, really, if you think
Mm.
about it. And why should we be accepting somebody else's rhetoric around, you know, basic healthcare, when we can actually look at it ourselves? And when we do quantum healings, and this is one of the things that I think is really important, this is where Dandelion again can help, is that because of the nature of quantum healing and how it works, there is this kind of lag sometimes, not with everybody, but with some people. And so there can be this kind of gap, maybe for 1 or 2 days, where it's like, has anything happened? Did it work? Has it worked? Am I better? And if you have
Yeah.
that doubt, then doubt becomes the predominant belief system. And so what I've often seen is the people who are most in the place of trust and just, you know, in a place of surrender, particularly with quantum healing, are the ones who have the biggest responses, because there's no sense of expectation. They just understand that everything that is flowing is what's meant to be. You know, and I get this quite a lot when I'm dealing with clients as well, is that their higher selves have specifically brought them to somebody like me, or maybe your other healers, because they know that they need a certain type of healing that is beyond the normal kind of paradigms of what Western medicine will accept as even real. You know, and this is why I believe so many people don't ever really get sick, get better from their long-term conditions. And of course, this is something I think I'm going to be talking about with my friend Rebecca O'Reilly this week, to do with long COVID and you know, Epstein-Barr virus and other things. You know, so I think it's really important that we start to assess our belief systems around getting better, and if we do have a healing, to be in a place of absolute trust that it's worked, and not to be perhaps in the sort of Western mindset of looking for the reasons why it hasn't worked. But then we, you know, we've been given a belief system that makes us, as you put it, don't expect that you will heal at once. And why can't we expect that? You know, one of the things the plant spirits have told me in the past is that we can heal anything as long as it's still in the body. They did make the distinction that once something has been removed, like an organ, then it's difficult to replace that. You know, of course, you can get somebody else's organ and put that in, but that's a whole nother energetic issue altogether. And I personally wouldn't recommend that for lots of reasons. So that's something to bear in mind, you know. And again, on a healing story, you know, the reason I'm where I am now in Mexico is because at the end of 2019, one of my plants told me to go and get, I had a bad vein in my left leg that was a result of a football injury on that knee, actually, in my 20s. And our healthcare service had told me that it was incurable. And then I met somebody at Plant Conscious who said, no, I know how you can cure this. There's a person in Mexico City who does ozone therapy, who works with a curandera who uses traditional curanderismo. And if you use the combination of massages and sweat lodges and ozone therapy, it will work. So on absolute faith, I didn't even look into what ozone therapy was. I'm glad I didn't, because most of what I looked at on the web sometime later put it into the bracket of snake oil medicine. And so something that was totally outside of the awareness or let's say recommended list of activities from our National Healthcare Service actually reduced what was really quite a bad situation by about 70%. I mean, it's not completely healed, but then there was 20 years of damage that needed to be repaired. But after 3 very intense weeks, my bad vein was flowing again and had severely reduced, and I was told that it was incurable. And actually that there was no way of removing the stagnant blood. And I watched as a doctor consistently pulled black stagnant blood from my leg, and now it's gone. You know, and I'd had the belief system for 15 years that it wasn't possible, that it was incurable, which is why it got so bad, because I was told there was nothing I could do about it. And yet that wasn't true.
Yeah, and it's you know, with certain exceptions, like such as you say. I mean, I've lost a couple of bits and pieces along the way.
Right.
If something, you know, somebody takes your appendix out, you don't get a new one.
Right.
But you know, if you're born without a limb, you don't grow a limb. But outside of that, there's not much that you can't fix
Right.
if you know how to do it. It's like Avicenna said, you know,
Mhm.
cured, or who won't accept the idea of cure. They removed cure from the list of permitted things you can say in the UK. You can't use the word cure to talk about what you do. You have to remove the word cure, heal, anything that suggests that your treatments might be, even the word treatment actually, that you know what you do might be successful. You're not allowed to say, which I think sends its own message in a way.
Wow. I mean, yeah, you know, this is probably another topic for another day. The idea of spelling within the English language is, I think, you know, the English language is really is a
God, yeah.
language of magic, and largely not of the positive kind. But you know, so this has been quite a long intro through the nature of time, really. You know, and the point that we were wanting to get to is really about what do we trust? You know, can we even trust the nature of time? When it's given to us in a structure, you know, and I think that's an important question. But we want to expand out from from this to perhaps a more well, we could say on one level amusing, because it certainly was a piece of pantomime and theatre, but the performances at this week's Oscar Awards, which are of course for performances in acting. So what do we make of the Chris Rock Will Smith performance, Pete?
Yeah, the golden balls, as I like to call them. The great and the good. Yeah, I mean, astonishing. I mean, it caught me up. You know, it became a global event. It should never have been a global event. It was a farce. But there was something that we're all being asked to look at. I mean, that's the way I took it. I thought, hang on a minute, why, you know, apart from the possibility that we might be diverted from various other things that are happening, like the research report from Pfizer that's just come out that basically says that the drug is not safe and doesn't work. The fact that they've just, oh yes, the fact that they've just brought out a new drug for alopecia might have something to do with it. But you know, when I was actually looking at the behavior, it was quite funny, because I think there's sort of things that we all get caught up in. Hopefully not to the extent of slapping each other, but I don't want to be too, you know, I don't want to be too sort of sort of derogatory about anybody involved, really, because I actually think, although we can sort of stand back and we can ridicule them, we can say, you know, stupid people, what do you go and do that for, or why do you make that terrible joke? My question was, why didn't the lady concerned actually fight her own battle at any stage? Because we've hardly heard anything from her. And you could sort of see the bind that Will Smith was in. First of all, he sort of found it was funny. Then he looked at his wife and saw that she didn't think it was funny. Then he thought probably something like, you know, I'm going to get it tonight in the hotel room unless I do something and turn this around. So, and then, you know, when he'd done the deed and he came back to his seat and started just mouthing off like they had to actually sort of blank it out, bleep it out. It was so potty mouthed. And I just thought, there's a guy who was being driven by emotional impulses that he had no control over whatsoever, unless it was all actually staged. But even then, he would have had to have made the decision emotionally, is this the right thing to do? You might even have thought it was a good thing to do. I mean, I saw pictures, I guess you saw them too, of Chris Rock apparently bracing himself for that blow, and almost like he expected it, or maybe that they'd planned it. I don't know what the reality of that is. Part of this, you know, our theme here is what's real, and how do we know what's real? You'll probably never get to find out unless Will Smith does a reveal at some stage, but
Right.
that's highly unlikely. These things appear, they're ephemeral, they appear, they catch people's imaginations, then they go away. And I think that if we want to, you know, if you ask the question, what am I being asked to look at here? Maybe we can be led to something which could be useful. I found it quite useful. You know, my family, we have a bit of a history of sort of stroppiness, to the extent that, you know, we get so worked up about things that we then actually lash out in some way. I guess we're not, you know, we're not unique in that. A lot of people do it. But is it ever a good idea? No, it's not. And not only because you might hurt somebody. I doubt very much that anything other than his ego was bruised in Chris Rock on that particular occasion. But you know, because actually when we hit somebody or when we do something like that, we actually hurt ourselves more than anybody else, and that's a really, really important lesson to learn. And it has to do, you know, there's a blogger in the UK who calls himself Another Angry Voice. God knows, he might even be listening, I don't know, and I kind of keep an eye on what he's doing. I've had a couple of run-ins with him actually, but he said, you know, click on this to find out what Will Smith slapping Chris Rock has got to do with Ukraine. And you click on it and it says absolutely nothing. And then he goes on about how everybody's sort of trying to make these things fit. But I think they do fit in a way, because I think that, you know, the whole Ukraine thing is another kind of example of mass knee-jerk reactivity, and nobody actually really looking at what the situation really is about and what it demands, and what course of action would be truly appropriate. What do you think?
Well, I think that's a nice segue, mate. So thank you for that. You know, so yeah, I did want to talk a little bit about the Ukraine piece for a variety of reasons. But just before I do that, I just want to just kind of conclude on that piece about Chris and Will. And, you know, I've watched it a number of times, and, you know, the more I watch it, the less convincing it becomes, because there's also a clip that you can see from the audience where it looks as if Will Smith's wife is also laughing at the joke. And as you alluded to, you know, it's interesting that in the same week that this happened, apparently, Pfizer has released a product for alopecia, you know, which of course is what Will's wife Jada suffers from, hence the reason that she doesn't have any hair. So, you know, we could look at it a number of ways. An inopportune joke that, you know, if we're to believe that this was a spontaneous event, and of course, let's remind ourselves that it's the Oscars for acting. You know, that's quite important. You know, if we are to believe that it's a spontaneous piece, and I'm rapidly finding that we don't live in a particularly spontaneous world, actually, the more we look at it. But it's like, you know, then the question becomes, well, if it wasn't and it was staged, what kind of message is that sending out? What is the deeper narrative here that's being programmed into us? Because that's, I think, something we should always consider too. And it's just like, is it okay to hit somebody in defense of, we could say, the feminine, right? You know, and then to mouth off, is that a good role model in defense of somebody who perhaps has an illness or is of the, you know, different gender or something? You know, what does that say? That it's okay to use violence to defend our beliefs? You know, possibly. Has it hurt Will Smith more than it hurt Chris Rock? Well, I would again, in the narrative, it looks like, yes, of course, he's going to, you know, perhaps lose credibility, etc., etc. But what is also interesting is that in the prelude to that, and maybe this hasn't had so much attention drawn to it, is that, again, true or no, it's difficult to say, but Will gave a very emotive speech about how difficult it is to be in Hollywood, and how much pressure you're under, and how much you're forced to do things you don't want to do, and how much flack you have to take. So again, was it part of the performance? Was it part of the preamble? Or was Will just on a bad night and perhaps, you know, got hit by the coronal mass ejections or something, and hadn't slept that well, and just kind of, you know, got triggered? Who knows? But I think the important thing is, like, you know, even just within this sort of 10-minute discussion on this, is like, it's difficult even for us to ascertain really what the hell was that all about. And I think if we roll that out to like the situation in Ukraine, I mean, you know, that the whole piece in the Ukraine, we can put through that filter. But one thing I would like to allude to, because this is something that is now going on and we're getting reports of, is the arrival of supposed Ukrainian immigrants into Ireland. Now, I think that this is an important piece to just ask questions about, not to necessarily draw any conclusions, but I think it's an important question to ask, why is probably the European country furthest away from the Ukraine, perhaps apart from maybe Iceland, been designated to receive the largest amount of Ukrainian immigrants? So in theory, the Irish government has opened up the borders of Ireland to receive 200,000 immigrants into Ireland. In a country with a population of 5 million, it amounts to an increase of 4% in the space of what could be weeks of the population. So, okay, you know, if we are to go into that rhetoric and follow it and say, okay, we're helping these poor people who are fleeing from the Ukraine, it then begs the question why people on the ground who've gone to check out the refugees are saying that the majority of people that are turning up are actually young men, mostly of African and Indian origin, who when questioned are saying that they are from the Ukraine, but when deeply questioned by people, it's like, well, no, not originally, I'm from Africa. So, you know, then on top of that, what's coming out of Ireland now is a lot of outrage that basically there are people who have been on a housing list, Irish citizens, who've been waiting to get a house for 10 years and haven't been able to get one. And then suddenly people are being, and then this is another question, is how are refugees getting from the Ukraine to Ireland? You know, because it's a long walk unless somebody gives you a lift or puts you on an aeroplane and pays for your ticket. So I think there should be a question around, you know, who is paying for this? Because clearly the Irish government can't be paying for it because Ireland is, like most European countries now, I think, bankrupt and broke. So somebody is footing the bill. And the question has to be, well, why Ireland? And also why men of African and Indian origin taking, I suppose, what you could say as a flyer or an opportunity to perhaps, you know, migrate to a country which they perceive or they've been told is a better option for them. So, you know, this again is like, who do we trust? What's the narrative here? And I think that it's always good to be in the place of why. Why Ireland? You know, why are people turning up that are not Ukrainian? And also why, in other news stories, are Ukrainian refugees who had fled the country, in this case to Poland, deciding that they didn't like the option in Poland and were actually better off in the Ukraine. So, you know, there's lots of questions here. And I think that the more that we put them through the filter of why, rather than believing the narrative that's given to us from the psychedelic box that we call television, and we just kind of sit back, because, you know, this is not conspiracy, this is not rabbit hole stuff. These are reports that are coming to myself and my colleague from friends back in Ireland who are on the ground, who are questioning on the ground why this is happening. You know, so, and again, I just want to reiterate, this is not in any way a divisive discussion. This is just a question of why. Well, why are these things going on? It doesn't make an awful lot of sense, does it really?
No, and you have the advantage of me with this one, Davyd, because I didn't know this until we logged on with each other earlier on, and you told me that this has been discovered. So I don't know. I commented at the time, and I'll just say it here, that I think there are, you know, it is a little bit of a rabbit hole, but we don't have to go too far down it. And a lot of people, I think, will be familiar with it, that there are all sorts of agendas operating in the world today that have certain sort of accepted narratives attached to them. And one of them is the migration of peoples and cultures around the world. Which we tend to think of as being random or triggered by some kind of event, whether it's a natural disaster or a war or something like that. And yet we realize that there's sort of certain inconsistencies. For example, who's taking all the Syrians who are fleeing? You know, we don't want them in our, you know, we don't, they die in the English Channel trying to get here because we will not let them come. So clearly there are choices being made at some level. And I kind of feel a little bit worried about Ireland now that you've told me that. But I think it is a, you know, for me, it's a question, as you now that you've alerted me to it, of watching and waiting and seeing. But there is also a suggestion that that there's a deliberate kind of plan to this as well. I mean, I have heard it said, and I can't remember the name of the operation being cited here, but there is. And it's known, you can look it up. And if I knew the name of it, if I'd sort of been able to do my research before coming here, and maybe we could put it on the podcast notes, Davyd, or something. But there is a plan which basically goes something like, we're going to mix your populations up because we don't want you to be black or white anymore. We want you to all be khaki. And so we're going to ship people around the place until that happens, until we wipe out the differences between people and we make you sort of homogenize you all. And you know, that again, it's like, why would you do that? Then you have to ask all sorts of questions around that one. But it is known, it's known about, and you know, we can provide a link or two that talks about it at quite high levels.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, again, it is a big rabbit hole piece, and I'm not going to dwell on it too much more. But you know, if we look over the last, particularly last 10 years, I think that anyone who's been paying any attention in many different locations will have observed the eradication of local cultures. Ireland has definitely experienced that, I believe, in the last 15 years, a rapid diminishing of Irish culture, Irish, you know, history, Irish poetry, Irish song, all of it. And then this is part of the great EU migration, I guess, that encouraged many people from different countries to expand their horizons, and no issues with that at all. But I have perceived, even in London, London is a city that I is not the city that I went to university in. It's become very sterile, I think, and you know, what were amazing places of uniqueness and kind of, you know, artistic nature, you know, like maybe Camden or down Carnaby Street or over in Notting Hill or whatever, you know, these places that had their own unique flavors, often based around kind of more boho arty kind of energies, have rapidly become sort of how to say, caricatures of themselves. And growing up in St Ives, also the Britain's #1 tourist destination down in Cornwall, it's become an absolute parody of itself. You know, it's kind of to the point where you have sort of, you know, yachting boat shops with all of the sort of the wherewithal that goes with all of that. And of course, you know, St Ives is a how to say, a tidal fishing harbour. So the idea of it being a yachting destination doesn't really fit that well. But for people coming down from up country, it makes perfect sense, because it's all part of the hallucination they've walked into, which is this kind of new twee country Cornwall experience that sort of speaks of smugglers and pirates on the one hand, but also speaks of upmarket dining and, you know, kicking back on the deck of your yacht, sipping a pina colada as the sun goes down over the bay in St Ives, and you know, all of which was completely horrifying for my granddad, who in his, bless him, in his final years had really become quite disturbed at what he was watching. The town that he'd grown up in, that was a genuine fishing village, had become this kind of freak show, sort of tourist theme park almost. You know, so I think that this is where we're sort of moving into the space of, like, you know, really questioning the realities and the narratives around things, and also the deculturalization of places like St Ives or London or Ireland or wherever. I think this is a global phenomenon, and removing what I would suggest is the more individual nature of places. And maybe people out there might disagree with me, but you know, having spent 2 years living in Italy, one of the wonderful things about Italy is that every single region, every single town has its own food, has its own special drinks, has its own culture. And it's like, you know, and that's what makes Italy rich, is that you've got this incredible sort of diversity within the land itself. And it's often through food and drink in Italy, but in other places it's something different. And I think that's something to celebrate. You know, we can be a global family, we can be a global village, however we want to call it, but at the same time we can still absolutely recognize and celebrate the individual nature of the human experience that gives all of these wonderful different cultural experiences all over the world. And I personally think that that's something that is important, because it gives humans a sense of uniqueness, but also a sense of belonging to the people around them, that creates community, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I you know, that's, as a traveler, and I know you are too, that is what really used to excite me, really, you know, going to places where things were done differently, having different experiences, different food, different drink, different language. You know, I mean, I love all of that stuff. And I think it started to recede quite a lot during the old pandemic anyway, because there was a, you know, clearly part of that was a restriction on travel, and who knows what was behind that as well. But you know, what upsets me a little bit is that the further, you know, the more that this goes on, the further away the younger generation particularly become from knowing what it was like. You know, it's a classic situation, isn't it? The old people, if you like, the older people in any population go, oh, you know, when I were a lad, and
Back in the
sort of
day.
bring out all the old stories. But actually, I saw something on TV which was just gobsmacking. It was an advert and it was an English product. I can't even remember what it was now, but it was some kind of drink, and it was a quintessentially English product, and it was basically being sold on the basis that it was really English and really came from the countryside, and it was really authentic. And in order to promote it, they got a jingle going that was being played by a cartoon Mexican band. And I thought, whoever designed that advert should be fired on the spot. Because
it was a good candidate for The Apprentice.
Yes, exactly. It's something that Sir Alan would have said immediately, or Lord Sugar, as he is now, would have been, what do you mean by, it's ridiculous, what are you doing that for, but actually they got through, and you're getting a generation of people who are being fed on that, and that I think is, that's how they're going to destroy it, because the people who don't have any reason to seek those experiences out anymore, are going to be the people who are creating the experiences in the future. And I think, when you can go to, you have, there were these little sort of funny tropes that come up from now and again, stupid things people have said, to complaints to travel agents, for example. Spain was fine, but there are far too many Spanish people around. Do you know what I mean? It's on that kind of level of, we expect to go to places and find everything to our liking, everything familiar. It's like England on the Costa del Sol sort of thing, rather than actually accepting places for what they are and what they can offer. And I think that the loss of cultural diversity, and again, we're being sold the image, if you like, or the illusion of cultural diversity. In a place like you mentioned, London, I have a lot to do with London. And I work in a college, which is a multicultural experience, because most of the people, the odd typical class that I take there is very, very diverse in ways that I've not really seen anywhere else, actually, in the sense that I might have people from Arabia, from Africa, from the West Indies, from lots from Eastern Europe, from not so Eastern Europe, closer at home, from Ireland, from Australia even, all of these people are sitting in a classroom because of the quality of what we offer, which attracts people. But then outside, this sort of cultural diversity that goes on out there is sort of, I don't know, I don't have anything to do with it. I accept what you say, that it isn't what it used to be. I think there is still some virtue in London, by the way, just a little bit of, big up London for, I think it's a hub where certain things can be shared. It seems to be a coordination point in the UK, I can call it that, where it's been like that for a long time, in a way where if you wanted to be an artist, you'd have to go to London. If you wanted to be a musician and make it in the music business, you probably have to go to London. There are a couple of other centers now, but I think that it's like, you go to London, you get what's there, you take it out. But it seems to be a very different experience. It's not really sort of embedded in London. There's something about the energy of London that facilitates it, maybe. And it's very interesting to me also, again, we could go off another track here, and I'm aware that time is probably against us now, but the financial sector in London is falling apart. It's pretty much empty since everybody's been moved out and is working from home. And yet there is still quite a lot happening there. In other contexts. Anyway, I think it's another watch this space.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the things that I would like to talk about in an upcoming show is the financial situation, and again, in relation to the narrative that's been given to us from the Ukrainian situation with the oil and gas. I think it really warrants a further, slightly deeper investigation and look at. But just to say, I'm really not in any way wanting to deride the great city of London, or to natives of London. I've spent a lot of time and was born.
City of my birth, Davyd.
What's that? Sorry.
City of my birth.
Well, me too. So it's coming from that place of seeing how much the city has changed, and I'm all for diversity, all for cultural diversity and expression of that and sharing of that. But I think that perhaps what we've lost is the container space through which those are being shared, and you used the word earlier, the imposition or the importing of other cultures that then consume the native culture is something that I've seen a lot of. And it's that, there's almost this sort of ubiquitous global, how to say, experience that you can tap into now as an international traveler that pretty much is the same everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
You know, and it's kind of like, I want to go overseas, but I don't really want to be put out of my comfort zone. So I want it to be as much as it can be back home, with a little bit of infusion, maybe with some local food in the 5-star hotel I'm staying at, and maybe a nice car that takes me out through the slums of Bombay, so I get to experience that, or whatever the experience is. But it's all somewhat removed from actually being in the experience. And I think that this is what I was trying to allude to, is that it's almost like the goldfish bowl now. To be an international tourist is to look through the goldfish bowl into another culture rather than to be immersed into it. It's become a sort of, whatever the local culture is almost a commercial offering that is made to people traveling, rather than it just being something that is going on that you experience. And one of the wonderful things I love about Mexico is that is still, in many places, isn't the case. Yes, down at the seaside, it definitely is. It's very touristy. But away from that, in other areas, like where I am at the moment, it's very traditional. It's very grassroots. There's no pretensions. Everything is still charged at a price that is reasonable and is affordable for everybody, and hasn't become a victim of the sort of global tourist market. And I think that, for me personally, one of the good things about the last couple of years and the sort of shutting down of that is the reduction actually in global tourism. And maybe this is a piece for another day, but to conclude today's piece, we want to introduce a plant, and today's hero is not our mascot of mayhem. We haven't found a space for him today, although I'm sure that give it another week or two and our mate Boris will have something for us to talk about. No, our mascot for today is the wonderful nettle plant, and Pete's going to really talk about the benefits of nettle from a herbal point of view. But nettle is being introduced because of its ability to help us hold our boundaries, which, given in the context of what we've been talking about, like who do we trust, what do we trust, holding our own boundaries and holding our own countenance, I think is very important right now. What say you, Pete?
Oh, absolutely. It's fundamental. I mean, I'm aware there are a couple of topics we didn't get onto, which I think are particularly around boundaries too. But yeah, I mean, what can you not say about this plant? I was out actually just a few days ago doing a herb walk. The theme was, spring cleansing, and what can we find that's growing around us that helps us to detoxify our systems in the spring. So we were looking at nettles, we were looking at cleavers, a couple of random ones actually. We found primrose, Primula vera, which I didn't know much about as a herb actually, but I kind of got my internet connection going, and I found out all sorts of things about primrose, which were completely mind-blowing. Again, a heavy-duty alterative in herbal medicine sense, which means a blood cleanser. But I've done nettle before on those herb walks. We did them for the college, and I just said to the guy, the videographer, I said, we've got to do nettle again. He's the man of the moment. We found a tree where the typical appearance of nettles, where it sort of grows around almost like guarding. I think it was an oak tree, and guarding we went into a wood, which is where we found a lot of the flowers and the plants, and the whole of the edge of the wood was circumscribed by a bank of nettles, and it really was that kind of guarding, outer wall, protecting boundary kind of thing going on. That was the energy of it. And I've said it before, with these guys around, I feel safe. But in terms of herbal medicine, amazing, such an array of different actions. We talk about herbal actions. I mentioned alterative, which is blood and lymph cleansing, immunomodulatory. I don't like using words like anti about herbs anymore. We have antiviral, antihistamine, anti this, that, and the other. Herbs are always, for me, they're always pro things. Well, they are anti things in some cases as well. But if we talk about herb being anti-inflammatory, we completely miss the point that inflammation is a serviceable function of the human body. It's part of the healing process. Right. Antihistamine, again, it's a natural bodily secretion chemical. So nettle is often trumpeted as an antihistamine, but I think of it as an immunomodulatory herb, because I think it does a good job when you've got any kind of immune problems going on. And I think certainly where allergy is concerned, because this is what histamine release is all about, nettle comes in, and if you take enough of him, this is the other thing about nettle tea, you can get him bagged up in supermarkets. Don't bother with that. There's no shortage. Go out and get some, and dry it appropriately. Don't dry it to within a centimeter or a millimeter of its life. Leave a little bit of moisture in there so that it's got some body, and then make a really, really strong infusion. I'm talking about sort of thing you could stand a spoon up in. Nettle tea has body, it has mucilage, it's a nourishing herb. It has a superb range of very, very important minerals, vitamins, etc. And it's the sort of thing you can use to build blood. I mean, one thing you want in the spring probably is to clear all the acids and the waste products out of the blood, and then fortify it with something new, with something with a new batch of nutrients. This is what nettle will do. If you use nettle to correct or bring people back from quite serious anemia, actually juicing it more than anything, making nettle juice and getting it right. It's like it's like a blood transfusion, actually, and it can work sometimes. I'm not recommending this, by the way, medically, in case anybody's worried, but it can sometimes work like a blood transfusion if somebody's really, really anemic. It's also a very good herb for the kidneys and the urinary tract, because there are other parts of the nettle we use. We don't just use the leaf, we use the root, which is an absolute miracle for anybody with benign prostatic hyperplasia. It's a disease that affects old blokes like me. I don't have it, by the way, but prostate tonic, which makes peeing difficult, and nettle actually cures it. Nettle root. It's what they call a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. So it stops the conversion of testosterone to dihydrotestosterone, which is what swells up your prostate and causes the problem. So it's a very male herb from that point of view. And then if that wasn't enough, it's also what we call a kidney trophorestorative. Another word for that might be adaptogen. It's one of our real kind of hardcore local UK, or it grows on everywhere, but in the UK, we're often saying, why do all the adaptogens come from Siberia or China or India? Why don't we have our own? Of course we do. We have wild oat as well. That's another one. We have burdock. That's another one. But nettle, one of the best, I think. And its seed is a kidney restorative. So I've seen people come back from chronic kidney disease, which is incurable. We were talking about incurable a moment ago. We know kidney function as low as 12, 13, 14%, come back up to 20, 25%, which you can actually survive on for quite a long time with the use of nettle seed. So yeah, lots and lots of stuff to be said for it, and because it's coming up in profusion at the moment, I recommend everybody get out there and get yourself a bunch of it and get it into you.
Grasp the nettle, so to speak.
Grasp the nettle, yeah.
Well, I mean, for me, nettle is another one of those unsung heroes, right? It's like dandelion; it grows everywhere, and generally has the fate of having Roundup put on it, or at least it did where we lived in Wales. But yeah. For me, what you were saying about the sort of the nature of the guarding, I often think of nettle as a bit like a Roman centurion, and when you see them in those sort of rows or phalanxes, particularly often in Wales, you would see them around hawthorn trees. It's almost as if that they're a Roman army guarding the fairy queen, which of course is hawthorn. So I love that analogy, and I totally concur with you, man. Get out there, pick the nice little fresh leaves at the top and dry them, like you said. Don't over dry them, but store them, keep them, because really and truly, nettle is only good actually to pick from the wild, unless you're managing your own nettle stand for the next couple of months. By the time we get to sort of late May, June, the plant's chemical composition is starting to change, and it's not so good for us. So there's really an onus now to go out and collect and store. But also, you mentioned there about nettle seeds, and a really, really amazing medicine to make later in the year with nettle is nettle seed tincture. Incredible medicine. Very also really good for giving the system a bit of a kick. Really sensitive people can often feel very energized on nettle seed tincture. But that's super interesting. Of course, yes, it's an adaptogen, and there is a tendency with a lot of things to look overseas for the more exotically named plants. But nettle is an adaptogen, and as my teacher Pam Montgomery once said to me, adaptogens are always trying to bring the body back into a place of balance, to get it nice and balanced. And I like that. It's adapting what is going on, and harmonizing the body so that everything is kind of coming back into a place of balance. But I think nettle probably deserves its own show, Pete, and maybe this is a future side project for us, is to do more dedicated shows that perhaps focus more on the plants and got to bring their qualities out. Because I mean, nettle probably could deserve its own full-length movie, perhaps without Will Smith or Pete Rock in it. But food for thought for another day. But yes, we're absolutely on the limit of our time. I've loved the chat today, Pete. We've wandered around a lot of things, and that is the nature of the web of Wyrd. It's meant to be dialectic. We jump onto the web with a few ideas, and then we end up in a completely different part of the web that we didn't expect to end up on, but have had, I think, a very interesting chat about many things. And, you know, what would be your takeaway soundbite, Pete, to offer our audience before we wrap up for today?
Um, I think for me, it's got to be about, you know, the thing that sort of I got really worked up about was the time thing, really. And I guess that for me, it's like, and I wish I could sort of get that message out there. So maybe this is my chance to, don't be afraid of time. Think of time as something that can work for you, like anything else. It's a structure that we adopt when it's useful for us, and when it's not, just don't worry about it. Don't worry about the future, for example, you know. Because actually these things have a habit of taking care of itself. You put your intention into the future, time and El Dandeliero will sort it out for you. And then if you want, you can just get Nettle standing by as well, just in case there's any guarding to be done on the periphery.
Nice.
Yeah, does that say it all?
I think it does, man. And just to add to it, my tuppence worth, I'd say, you know what, man, you know, get your boundaries tight and really question anything that comes to you from an external source, whether it's narratives, ideas, belief systems, possibly even pathogens or energies, and really start to decide for yourself what you allow into your energy body, your physical body, your emotional body, your awareness, and realize that everything is always a conscious choice. And the more present you are, the more aware you are of all of these things. And like you said, yeah, you know, the future is always the future, man. The present is the most important thing, and work with that powerful intention in the present moment and keep expanding the present moment. You know, and if you're unsure how to do that, get yourself some dandelion essence, and El Dandelero will happily share with you his Time Lord experiences. So on that bombshell, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you, Mr. Jackson Main, for your erudite wisdom and endless amusing stories. And I look forward to the next round. And is your website ready yet, Pete? Can we direct people there, or is it still?
No, it's dragging. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's dragging along a bit, but I'm working the final details out as we speak.
Right.
Been on it today actually, but shouldn't be that long now.
Sounds like you need to get Dandelion on the case, mate. And
yeah, good idea. Good idea.
Bring that website into the present moment. Anyway, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you, Pete, for your time. And we'll see you all next time. God bless and take care.